Remember how much you enjoy talking to them and tell them that you love them at the end, because you really do. Oh, sorry. I was just taking a note there about you, and that's not weird at all. This video is about note-taking in poker. I don't know what that was. Sorry. This is about note-taking in poker, something we get asked a lot about here at Transform My Poker, and I think people have a bit of confusion about why they should do it, how they should do it, whether it's important and that kind of thing. So in this video, what I want to tell you is how it can be valuable to take notes, but also I want to give you a little bit of value about getting better reads on your opponent generally and using notes to do that. So back in the day, the way that people would take notes, because obviously they were all playing live, not online, is they'd have an actual notepad and they'd actually write, you'd see them doing it at the tables or in breaks. And a lot of the regulars who would play, professional poker in the same room would actually have a book on all of the players they played with, and they'd add their notes to that book at the end of a session. Now, we don't have to do any of that because we have phones and we also have our online tracking systems and note systems and all that good stuff. But is it important that you take notes? Well, it's not essential, and it slightly depends how often you're going to be playing with players. The more likely you are to play with the same players again, the more you should be trying to make notes and build detailed reads on those players. Also, the better your memory and recall, the less you need to do this, right? That obviously stands to reason. If you are playing in massive multi-table tournaments on PokerStars or something like that, then taking notes is much less valuable because your chances of playing those same players again is not as relevant. However, if you're going to your same card room every day, you're going to play the same regular professional players and the same regular casual players a lot of the time, right? So it becomes more valuable. So that's your call. However, you do want to be getting more detailed reads, and I believe taking notes gets you into the habit of taking more detailed notice of what people are doing and also finding ways to exploit them and win more chips. So let's go through how we work it. Number one of our 6 keys to taking good notes and building good profiles is to observe well. To observe well. I bang on about this a lot. If you're not observing well when you play poker, then you're probably not that good a poker player, sorry. But also, the reason I say that is you can be a really good poker player and not do certain things well. You can't be a really good poker player and not observe well. The good news is you don't need to know all the other stuff that a good poker player knows in order to observe well, right? Anyone can observe well, anyone. It's just paying attention. Now, I know that's tough in this modern age, right? We all have distractions. You've probably got several other browser tabs open while you listen to me. We all have things that divert our attention. But if you want to do well at this game, then you have to understand that getting information is absolutely key to achieving that. And all of that information is out there for you, but only if you're observing well. So I can tell you everything about building a read on an opponent and note-taking, but it won't have any effect on your game unless you are switched on and observing well. And one of the keys, I think, to knowing when you're not playing your A game is when you start to autopilot and you stop thinking about your opponents and you don't observe well. So make this commitment, if it's the only thing you take away from this video, that whether you're playing online or live, whatever poker you're playing, you will always observe well from now onwards. Make it a habit. You don't need to learn anything about poker to get better at this. And if you watch a really good player, like I said, they all have it in common. They know what's going on in the game. They understand the ranges that their opponents are playing pre-flop. They know what their tendencies are and so on after they've been playing with them a couple of hours. You've got to observe well if you're going to progress. All right. Number 2 is go with your default. So defaults matter. So we're going to talk about what you should make notes on, what you should look for, how you can take advantage of opponents. But when you first play with someone, you won't know too much about them, right? If you're playing online, you've got a HUD running, you'll have some idea of their pre-flop frequencies, unless you've just started playing with them. So you'll have a sort of vague idea of their hand range. If you're playing live, you can see the person. So maybe you can draw some assumptions from that. You know, what age range they are, gender, how comfortable they are in a card room, are they professional or amateur, that kind of thing. But you won't have a ton of information until you've played an awful lot with a player. So go with your defaults, right? If you're used to playing a certain type of tournament or a certain type of cash game, you'll know the kind of player that you meet there. You'll know their kind of tendencies. If you've got the beginnings of a read on your HUD, so you know like their pre-flop raise and VPIP, you can kind of generalize their hand range, right? Because those hand ranges tend to be quite static. If someone's playing 25% of hands, that's similar across all players playing 25% of hands, not identical, but similar. So you can go with your defaults. And the more you play in a specific game, the more you'll get used to the type of players that play in that game. So what we're talking about when we're talking about taking notes is really adjustments from those assumptions. It's really things that you wouldn't know just from looking at them or watching them play for 5 minutes live, or things that you wouldn't know from the numbers that your HUD will gather. Really, this is next level stuff. When you're making notes, doesn't matter if it's a mental note, on a pad, on a screen, it doesn't matter. You're making notes for future you. So when I'm bored and I want to entertain myself, I sometimes write notes to my future self and say, hey, future Nick, here's something you want to know about this player. Oh, and by the way, well done on the last month. You were awesome. I don't write that. But you're writing notes that your future self can use. So it's important that the notes are relevant to you, right? Notes for your future self. For future self. So people ask me, should I be taking notes? What should I be taking notes on? Well, there's only one reason to take notes on players, and that is to win more chips from them, right? That's the only reason. So you're talking to your future self about how to win more chips from them. So your notes should reflect anything that will help you do that, right? And we'll go on to talk about some of the things that could be. But basically, it should be stuff that won't be immediately obvious from their physical appearance if you're live, or their stats if you're online. So a very common note that I use, and I think a lot of other pros use, is DNB, which means do not bluff. So that's me telling my future self that no matter how tempting it is, this is not a player that I want to bluff. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm never going to bluff them. That does mean that I'm going to be very wary about bluffing them, because obviously my observation is that they call way too much, right? So stuff like that can help you in the future is what you're trying to record in your notes and mentally about players that deviates, right? So if we're playing online, you want to use color coding. Look, I've done the American spelling of color. I've been completely Americanized. This is disastrous. Let's keep it UK based. Color coding, right? So on most websites or tracking software, you'll be able to color code your players that you're playing against, or sometimes there are symbols, okay? Now, this is obviously quite crude, because you could color code someone a professional player. Well, there are lots of different types of professional player and lots of different levels of professional player. You could color someone a fish or a weak player. Well, there are lots of different types of weak player. But what this kind of color coding does is it's a shortcut. And if you're jumping into a cash game and you want to assess it before you jump in, you can quickly see how strong or weak a table it is that way. You can also, if someone sits down with you at a tournament or you get moved table and you need to make a quick decision, if you happen to have 3 or 4 of these color codings, you can know what the players are like still to act behind you or whatever. So it is worth doing, and it does give you that little quick read. It's not a big deal, right? You're not going to suddenly become a better player because you're color coding, but it does help you focus on your opponents a little bit, and it does help you with the occasional quick read as well. Don't do this live. If you walk around the table with a marker coloring people in live, they won't like it, so it's only for online players. And then we're basically going to note anything out of the ordinary, and we're looking for weaknesses. So note weaknesses. Note weaknesses, also note anything out of the ordinary, right? Because those are the things that really define players' tendencies. So we're really trying to think, okay, I know how I would normally play against a player in this game, but this guy has just made a bluff that I wouldn't usually see people make at this level of poker. So I need to remember that, so I'm going to make a note. So your note would be capable of big bluffs, or can turn a made hand into a bluff, or will often semi-bluff, whatever it is. If it's something out of the ordinary that's going to help future you, you need to make a note of it. Now, if you have fantastic recall, as some people do, you don't need to write it down. But I think writing down helps, because it helps you focus on it. Now, I know if you're multi-tabling online, it can be tough to do this. You can just make a very quick note or abbreviation, then you can go back after the session and make the proper note if it's something that's really going to be valuable. If you're playing live, you can write it on your phone, or you can write it on a pad. If you're self-conscious, you could always step away or do it in a break. That's up to you. But you want to know anything that's a weakness especially, but you also want to know anything that's out of the ordinary or anything that you're going to be able to take advantage of later on. Pretty simple, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be, you know, in a set way. It should be in a way that speaks to you, but just anything that's going to help you make chips later on. And then finally, here's a key piece that I think most people miss, and another really valuable thing to take from this video, because I don't see many people do it until it's pointed out to them. You want to make a note of individual history, right? Individual history. Let's change that. Let's say direct history. Direct history. I think that's a better way of expressing it. By direct history, I mean, what have they seen of you, right? What's the direct history between you and them? So this can be absolutely vital, because hands that we've actually played against a player are going to have way more influence than anything else in terms of how they view us, right? And they're also going to influence how they act. Never forget, even if you're a 12 table multi-tabler, right, online, it doesn't matter what poker you're playing, you're always playing against human beings, right? Providing the game's on the level. You're always playing against human beings, and human beings have tendencies, and human beings react to what happens to them, right? They are subjective creatures. So where I'm going with this is, if a player has seen a big bluff that you've done, let's say you make a big bluff and that player calls and they see that you've got, you know, the 7-4 offsuit or whatever it is, they will remember that. My good friend and mentor Brian Townsend once said that some player will remember an out-of-line move for at least 10,000 hands, possibly more. Players remember stuff like that. It sticks in their brain. So if you can make a note of it so that you know that you've made this failed bluff or a successful bluff or whatever, then that direct history can really help you understand what your opponent's thinking. You know, you can also go the other way, by the way, on this. If you've had to fold post-flop 3 or 4 times in a row to a player, you should make the note, thinks I'm tighter than I am, right? Thinks I'm tighter than I am. So that becomes a bluffing opportunity for you, doesn't it? Because if a player has seen you fold more than normal, then you have got that vigorish where the direct history suggests that you don't bluff very much. So you can now increase your bluffing frequency against that player. So direct history notes are really important. And if you do make any notes additionally that you weren't making before this video, I'd really advise you make those, especially if you're going to keep playing the same game live or online for an extended period of time. You're always going to, you're always going to jump into the 1-2 or the 2-5 or the $10 buy on a site or whatever it is. Then you really want those direct history notes, because that can give you an edge. So there you go. Notes can be used to further your player profiles, but please remember, it all comes from observation. Your job is to get as much information on your opponents as possible, to find their weaknesses and then adjust your game to exploit those weaknesses and turn them into chips. And note taking can be a big part of that. All right, I hope that's been of value and benefit to you. If it has, give it a Facebook like, share it on Facebook and in other social media channels. And leave me a comment underneath the video. I'd love to know what you think. Any questions you have on what we've talked about or anything else I can help you with in poker, I will dive into those comments over the next few days. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Until then, run good, because that's the hard part.